It's hyperbolic to say, I mean, we are truly poised on the brink of a massive regional, if not larger, war. We can go ahead and put some images up on the screen here, not entirely unexpected, but still obviously dramatic and deeply disturbing. You had a barrage of missiles fired at Israel, appears to be at military sites within Israel across the entire country. We'll just keep this footage rolling. Some of those missiles, which were reportedly ballistic and hypersonic, some of them were, of course, shot down by the Israeli Iron Dome missile defense system. Some of them, though, were not.
You can see some of those.
You can see some of those impacting the ground. That may be the ones in Tel Aviv. I'm not sure. I know there were some in Tel Aviv, but really throughout the country. Still very much early hours in terms of assessing what the damage is. As far as we know, there was only one casualty. It was actually a Palestinian in the West Bank. And I believe the reporting I saw, and all of these things continue to be kind of murky, was that he was actually struck by the fallout from one of those Iron Dome interceptor missiles. So obviously, we've been tracking very closely this continued escalation and the continued provocations from Israel that led to this point, and also the continued abdication of duty from the Biden administration, which is incredibly consequential here. You have this in response to a number of actions, including the targeted assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Iran's capital city of Tehran. We've been kind of waiting for some sort of response there from Iran. They've been, I have to say, very, sort of cautious and measured, and seem very much not to want to get pulled into a further escalation. And then, of course, you had the massive attacks on Hezbollah, both with the pager and walkie-talkie attacks, and then with the assassination of Nasrallah, along with the decimation using over 80 2,000-pound bombs of somewhere around 1,000 Lebanese people as well, quite a number of women and children among them. You now have the early phases of a ground invasion into Lebanon, so Iran saying that these strikes are in retaliation for those actions. The latest we know is that it appears the U.S., of course, standing strong with Israel. They have a right to defend themselves, all the things you would expect them to say. Kamala Harris came out and gave a big speech saying, everything you would expect her to say. Nothing off script there. And Israel threatening an aggressive response in reaction to this. And so, Ryan, I think we were joking, it's like gallows humor. This is like the least surprising October surprise of all time, because we have watched the way that Bibi has continued to want to escalate and expand this war. And that's no surprise. That's in his political interest. It's in his long-term ideological interest. And Joe Biden has said from the beginning that avoiding what you're seeing on your screen right now, that this was his primary goal with respect to Israel and Palestine. And yet through his refusal to ever say no at any juncture and do anything other than, leak to the oh my gosh, I'm so angry, I'm so upset, et cetera. This is the incredibly predictable, almost certain result of that inaction from the Biden administration.
Yeah, and we have so the IRGC put out a statement, which I think is really interesting if you parse it, where they say this was done, quote, in response to the assassination of martyr Haniyeh, Syed Hassan Nasrallah, and Sadr Nifo Rashan, we targeted important targets. So because the IRGC waited to respond at the behest of the United States, Israel kind of got a twofer here, because they're responding at once to the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran, and then also to the assassination of their top officials in Beirut, plus of Nasrallah. But then they say, and this is the key detail, they say, if the Zionist regime responds to our attack, our next attacks will be more devastating. And they note in their statement that they targeted 3 military bases: Nevatim, which houses F-35 aircraft; Netzarim, which houses F-15 jets used in the assassination of Nasrallah; and Tel Nof base near Tel Aviv. So they were very clear, we're not going after civilian targets, we're going after military targets, and they explain why they went after the military targets. And then they say, basically, if you don't strike back, this is over. Like, we had to save face, you did all of these things to us, now we've done these things to you, we're even. The U.S. has responded by calling it a brazen attack and saying that Iran must be punished. Iran, the U.S. could come out and say, all right, you know what? You actually did
as they
blow
did.
up a guy in Tehran, and you actually did blow up their generals in Beirut.
Well, and they kind
and
of
they
did
responded.
last time, reportedly, Biden urged Bibi to say, listen, you shot down their missiles.
Right.
Let's call it even.
Right.
And stop there. Now, obviously, it didn't stop there. But
it did, because that was April.
for a time.
So
for
we
a
haven't.
time.
Right.
Yes.
Well, let's be clear though. In terms of the White House statement, so far and everything, I spent the entire day for, RIP myself, watching every government press conference, State Department, Pentagon, and all of this. Were you there?
I got dissed, no question.
Oh, interesting. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm sure he knew.
There were some other good questions that were asked.
The most important one to me was actually Jake Sullivan's statement, where in Jake Sullivan's statement he said he saw it as an escalatory, quote, significant escalation, and that we will work with Israel in their response. Tacitly, basically greenlighting this. We should not forget what happened last time. So yes, the White House did put out a statement and saying, hey, you guys shouldn't do anything. But a lot of people forget that the Israelis, remember, struck that air defense system that's right outside an Iranian nuclear site, which was actually very militarily significant. Because if I pair it with some of the statements that are coming out of the Israeli highest echelons, we are seeing open calls for a couple of things. One, to wipe out Iranian oil refineries. Two, is to wipe out Iranian nuclear facilities, which specifically that previous strike was like a warning. It's like, hey, we took out the air defense. We can come back here if we want to, just to show you. Three is actually just straight up regime change. And I have been deeply concerned here because the most senior elements of the Israeli regime, all from people inside and outside the government. I was watching MSNBC actually to see if Ehud Omer, who has criticized Bibi at points, to see what he would say. He was advocating for regime change in Iran. We have Naftali Bennett, the previous prime minister here, theoretically, who was in opposition. He has a long statement out. He says Israel has now the greatest opportunity in 50 years to change the face of the Middle East. The leadership, blah, 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 made a terrible mistake. He says we must now remove this terrible threat to our children's future, which can grant the Iranian people an opportunity to rise up and shake off the regime that tyrannizes its women and its daughters. So clearly now, regime change is like the uniparty decision here that has been arrived at the elites with Tel Aviv and at the top of the Israeli government. So when we combine that with what we previously saw from them, I don't think it is out of the question to say that we could see a full-on IDF bombing of major targets all across Iran, on top of a possible assassination of the Ayatollah Khomeini. So previously, I was watching some senior military officials, former IDF and others, who were on Fox News, and almost immediately after the strike, like minutes afterwards, they were saying, oh, well, the Ayatollah is now somebody that we could see here. So it is very, very possible that in the next week or so, we see an actual campaign of regime change that is potentially foisted or on Iran by Israel. But there's no question that any of us should have that this will not involve the United States. We would give them the weapons to do so. 24 interceptors were actually fired by U.S. Navy assets. I did the back
Plus
of the
some
napkin.
in the Iraq base,
We are at $100 million for today, just today, in terms of how much it costs to shoot down that. The Iranians, remember, have some of the largest ballistic missile, I believe one of the largest stocks in the entire world. Quite cheap, and they've been preparing for this for quite a long time. Another big tell is that if you guys have seen, the Israelis keep saying this was a very successful operation. It's not a success if some of the missiles get in. It's a failure. If a missile strikes your military assets, that is a huge failure. Also, what would the number be if America didn't fire some 24 of those 180 out of the sky? I think we actually know what the answer is. And so when you start to put all of these together, really we actually saw part of the Israeli responses, they're like, we need to have deterrence restored. That's a tell, because they keep saying it was an ineffective attack. No, it's not an ineffective attack. It struck military targets inside of Israel. It didn't kill anyone, probably more by design. On the Iranian side.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, this was intended to overwhelm the Iron Dome. That's the saturation ballistic missiles. When you do that, you're specifically trying to overwhelm the Iron Dome.
Yes.
So that's obviously what happened.
And that's another thing. There's Iron Dome, there's Arrow 3, and there's David Sling. So Iron Dome typically used for rockets. I believe the ballistical missile defense. Arrow 3, David Sling also was engaged. But anyways, I mean, best, and also, who wants to know who sells each of the parts of all
well,
three of
just
those?
go look at the stock market.
You
know,
you're right.
you're
Where do you think all those
invested
come from?
in
Every
Boeing, et
single
cetera,
one is from the United States. So we are fully going to be involved. And if you think that there's going to be an Israeli attempt to overthrow, how many people live in Iran? Tens of millions. A country of 10 million can try and have regime change in a country of tens of millions of people, massive, a traditional power center
if they can kill
in the
Khomeini,
Middle East.
yeah.
Right. Okay. But